So check it out. Remember, we were talking about Michael Jeffries and Matthew Smith. So from the indictment, so they were so this indictment actually started because of a civil suit, but it was filed in the Southern District. So allegedly, Jeffries was described as the man who just never stopped working for the brand, thinking for the brand. And that's how he created Abercrombie, which was a bunch of shirtless guys posing. But little did people know is that Michael Jeffries was sleeping with all these shirtless guys. That's the whole point of um, the brand was to get these models so that Jeffrey could sleep with them because he was one of the worst CEOs ever. He 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 caused a company lost sales 11 quarters in a row. So what did he do? He had what do we call it? Modeling scouts scour the internet and to identify attractive young men, and the scout would require a young model to meet with him for a casting call. And then, if the modeling scout saw potential, he would be invited to attend the casting at the home of Michael Jeffries with his partner Matthew. And then they would ship him off to New York, Morocco, England, and France, and that's where Jeffrey and other men would abuse them under the guise of becoming the next Abercrombie model. And so he's actually not just suing Jeffries, he's suing the Abercrombie company because he says Abercrombie knew and endorsed and like supported Jeffries' degenerate behavior by using the brand to abuse these men. And how do we know that? Because the models were given Abercrombie gift cards and clothing. So the model had to go to an Abercrombie store and buy the clothing, and they would get a call sheet and they would get prepaid travel arrangements from their location to the Abercrombie CEO in the Hamptons. And everybody who worked at Jeffrey's house had to wear Abercrombie clothes, including the security staff and Jeffries and his boyfriend. And so they'd have an interview with Jeffries, and then they'd strip down, which was apparently normal, not just at Abercrombie, but everywhere. But then, this is where it got weird. Yeah, this is where it got weird. They had to sign an NDA, and then they took them in a room where two men were banging each other, and then Jeffries drugged them and abused them. And sometimes he took them to a remote private location that was arranged by Abercrombie. And he said that was like the price you had to pay to get one of the best roles in the industry, which was an Abercrombie model. So everybody would tell him that this was totally normal and everybody wanted to do it. And so these guys who are suing as a class action. So basically, a class action means that there's a large number of plaintiffs who are all similarly affected by the person that they're suing. So the class actions are normally cases that you see in product liability. So if a manufacturer makes a product, especially a medical product that is harmful, then people sue as a class action because you don't know how many people are out there. But so they're trying to say that there's like maybe thousands of these models who should be suing. So Abercrombie knew that Jeffries um, was doing all this bad stuff and used force and threats and abuse and exploitation and fraud to make these men do the perverted stuff. And they did it because they were going to make millions of dollars off of it. And by that, they mean they kept Michael Jeffries happy. He would stay CEO and he would keep making them money, even though he was the worst CEO in the world. So they should have just fired him, but they didn't. So now we have jurisdiction. So they're suing in federal court, but they're suing for state with under state law, which is allowed under certain rules. And the reason they can sue under state court, under federal, they can sue in federal court, and the federal court was applying both federal and state law because there are um, what we call diversity jurisdiction. It means there's a lot of different people involved in the case, parties to the case, and they're from different states. So it wouldn't be fair to sue them in one state or the other because a state court might favor a party that's a resident of its own state. So yeah, they're suing in federal court, and a lot of the activity happened in New York, so they're suing in a New York court, and this happened in Jeffries' New York City mansion and his home in the Hamptons. So that's why New York is a fair place to have the um, the lawsuit. Now, this guy who's suing, he's a U.S. citizen from Pennsylvania, but he's saying there's at least 100 dudes that were involved, and then obviously Abercrombie's from Ohio, but it operates in New York, obviously, so it's responsible. And Michael Jeffries was CEO, and Matthew was his boyfriend, and they both lived in Ohio, and his office is in Ohio. And now back to the story. So got some like BS. So that the venue was that Abercrombie was actually a sex trafficking business that was disguised as a clothing store, and it was run by Michael Jeffries. And then Jeffries was like, uh, he demanded that every victim was compliant, and they didn't, then he would punish you. And now we got to the history that Abercrombie started in 1892, and then by David Abercrombie, and then in 1900, then Ezra Fitch became a partner, and then so they called it Abercrombie and Fitch, and then in 1976 it was filed for bankruptcy, and a sporting goods store bought it out, and then another company called The Limited bought Abercrombie and tried to turn it around. And so in 92, Leslie Wexner hired Jeffries to be the CEO, and Jeffries was like, let's make um, let's make it into a clothing brand with sex appeal for, and then use this half-naked guys, and that seemed to work because nobody was that bold before. And before he was at Abercrombie, Jeffries bankrupted some other company, and then in '96 Abercrombie went on the stock market and then did really well until 2008. And here's a photo of the brand. It can speak for itself. And then they were like really sizzling, and Wexner was always loved the Abercrombie guy, and they had a shrine. So Abercrombie obviously kept paying Jeffries, and uh, they kept pushing the envelope, and the depravity only went so far. So they were actually, it wasn't enough to just advertise the perversion; they had to actually do it. And Jeffries said that he built the brand because he hired good-looking people, because good looking people attract other good looking people, and we want to market to cool, good looking people. And people got pissed off, and they're like, oh, you don't sell the fat people and whatever. And then in 2008, he made $71 million, and so he was making a ton of money, and he was hosting parties all over the world. And there was a middleman who who said he worked for Abercrombie, and he's the dude that was recruiting all these models. And every time he hired a model, he'd pay them like thousands of dollars in cash after they were assaulted. But he told them that they had to take part in the perversion in order to become an Abercrombie model. And so the scout was the one who um, told them that and paid them, and that basically was prostitution. And Matthew got to manage this whole thing, and so Smith was without a doubt, Matthew Smith was without a doubt working for Abercrombie because he attended Abercrombie board meetings and he had an NDA, so they could basically do whatever he wanted. And Matthew went to over 170 stores, so clearly he had influence over the company, even though he didn't work there. And then you can reference the disturbing aircraft standards manual. And yeah, so then in 2014 they kicked Michael Jeffries to the curb because he was a terrible CEO, but they let him use Abercrombie resources. So he kept doing whatever he wanted to generate money for the company, and he was paying hush money. And there was a ton of communication between Jeffrey's office, which is basically him and his boyfriend, and the models and employees at Abercrombie. And they were paying, so they were commingling their funds, basically, the family office and the company, even though the CEO was fired. But it was well structured and complex. And Abercrombie knew that this was happening, and it was not possible to happen without the company because they were using the Abercrombie name. Basically, they're saying that if Michael Jeffries was just some degenerate, these models would not have shown up. The only reason they showed up and got coerced into the perversion is because they were convinced that they could get a modeling career with Abercrombie. So that's why Abercrombie, the company, is liable for what took place. And at the same time, Abercrombie wouldn't have been so massively profitable if it didn't have the CEO who was a pervert. So that was the image too, that these models who actually got the job were pushing people into the stores. And so these 100 dudes had to stay quiet and not blow the whistle till now. Now it's too late. And so yeah, this kept going on, and a lot of them have come forward but want to remain anonymous. So I keep going, and then now there's a Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which forbids any kind of trafficking of people, and it's a criminal law, but it also has a civil suit. So you go to jail, but somebody who's victimized could also sue you for it, and so that's what they're suing under. And then they basically repeat the same allegations of the trafficking, but in a lot more detail, including what happened to the guy who's suing. His name is David, and so it might not be his real name, but he's saying that he went to a casting event, and during the event there were 6 other models, and they were all wearing Abercrombie, and he was told to strip to his undies and given some alcohol, And then Jeffries and his boyfriend were there, and they were also wearing Abercrombie. And then they made him watch some perverted stuff, and they drugged him, and he didn't want to be drugged, and then they raped him, and then they paid him $2,500 cash. And then they put him on a plane and they sent him to London, and they took away his passport, and then they did it to him again and again and again, and this happened for a while, and this has been going on from 1992 to at least 2014, and Abercrombie's to blame again because they were the ones that ran these events and paid for the employees and the clothing and the travel and the money. So there's the deal, and yeah, and so now they also brought a class action, which means that they can guess how many people were abused, and then they can take a big pile of money from Abercrombie, the company, and then they can people can come forward later and they can get a chunk of the money. So if there's 1,000 dudes or whatever, they can all get some money. So everybody that was a model can come and say, uh, I was abused and I want some money, please. And then they'll give them some money. So that's the deal. And here we go. And then these are vicarious liability. So these are just more like they're suing under a whole bunch of different laws and see what, so they can see what sticks, because the court might reject some of their arguments. So they put everything into the lawsuit under every law that could possibly apply, and then they're hoping they get something out of that. So again, this is 128 pages, but it's basically the same thing. The bottom line is that Jeffries was a pervert, and he abused the models, and Abercrombie knew it was happening, and they were paying for it, and they were doing it because um, it made the CEO happy, which made them money, and the CEO couldn't have done it without the Abercrombie because he was uh, using the trafficking as a front. He was using the modeling as a front to do the trafficking. If there was no modeling, there wouldn't have been any trafficking. So that's their deal. And then at the end, they want some money. So if they want to certify that this is a class action, which means uh, that they can sue on behalf of everybody who's affected, including people that they don't know exist and they don't know their names. And the benefit of that is the guy who brought the lawsuit says that he's the class representative, which means he is representing all the people who were victimized, and so he gets a bonus compensation. And his lawyers basically are class counsel if that happens. So the lawyers get like half the money for themselves, typically. And they want, of course, compensatory and punitive damages at an amount determined at trial, which could be like, who knows, $1 billion, depending on how many people they figure out happen. Plus, they also want interest, and they want a trial by jury. And yeah, so that's the deal. Any questions? Please post a comment. Thank you.